guest, Selfdecode. So most of you all know I'm passionate about many subjects. One of those includes how we can take control of our own health, and towards that endeavor, Joe's done a great amount of work putting Selfdecode together. He's the CEO of the company, and I've just been really, really intrigued by the depth of the articles that are published over there because I've been following a lot of functional medicine people for a long time. So over the years, I've read Dr. Mercola's blogs and many other people's articles, but the quality and the depth of the citations that I find, I mean, almost everything that's referenced over there has a citation to a peer-reviewed study, which backs up the supplements and the ranges and everything that's recommended there for the test. So I thought it would be interesting to interview Joe and get his own story and background behind his motivation for starting Selfdecode. So welcome, Joe. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. So yeah, the motivation for starting Selfdecode was basically to figure out. I wanted to understand how to be optimally healthy, and I wanted other people to understand that as well. So initially, it was creating content around very in-depth content around a bunch of health topics, supplements, things that there wasn't that kind of in-depth topic, in-depth information about. But then I started to realize that we needed software in order to help people figure out how to be healthier, how to improve whatever they wanted about their bodies. And the only way to do that is through understanding genetics, understanding, what people's lab tests mean. So I was looking and I was, at my own genetics, at my own lab tests, and and then I started to realize that other people didn't really know what their lab test meant. They didn't know anything about the genetics. So that's what really led me to get into the genetic software in order to be able to educate people, but in a much more personalized way, rather than just having articles on the internet, which is what we had before, and we still have that. But I wanted people to understand, how do I know if this supplement works for me? How do I know if this diet works for me? How do I know if this, or what do I need to do for this, condition, or how do I improve X, Y, Z? And so the only way to know that is through really understanding your biochemistry, and that you need your genetics for.
Great. So, bunch of places we could go from here. Firstly, there's this kind of pervasive idea in alternative medicine circles that epigenetics is everything and genetics doesn't really matter much. So I've seen this being peddled a lot as well, and I think people really misunderstand it. What epigenetics is, because as far as my understanding goes, epigenetics is all about like lifestyle, diet, other kinds of like exercise or supplements, things like that, changes we can make in our practical lives in order to manage the genetic snips that we're born with. What do you think about that?
So epigenetics is very important, but I think people need to understand, we need to define what epigenetics is. So an epigenetic is anything that is changing, not is changing your gene expression. You're not changing the genes, you're changing your gene expression. And obviously gene expression has a very big role, because you could have identical twins and they could be different in a bunch of ways. So there's definitely a role for gene expression. The body was designed so that there's an adaptability to different environments, to different inputs. And so in that larger sense, that's what epigenetics is, right? And so that's obviously very important. But if you want to change your genetic expression, there's two things that matter: what you do and what your underlying genes are. So your genes actually influence your epigenetic expression. If you put two people on the same exact diet, same lifestyle, same everything, you're giving them the same epigenetic expression, but these people will be different, right? So let's say if you're in, a very hot climate, you're going to be more dark, because your body is, it's acclimating to that environment. But you also have a genetic expression where because you've evolved in that environment for a long time, you're much more likely to be dark to begin with, to handle the hot sun, the strong UV rays. So you have that genetic, the underlying genes, and then you have the genetic expression, which if you're in no sun, you're obviously not going to be as dark, right? So obviously the genetic expression has a big impact. The genes have a big impact. Your genes really tell your genetic expression how they're going to work, but still you need to know how to tweak your genetic expression, and that is determined by your actual genes. So you've seen this many times, two people on the same diet or same supplement or same whatever, and they respond very differently. It's because it's not, they're both making epigenetic changes, but you have to make the right epigenetic changes for your body.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's only after I discovered my genetics could I make the right epigenetic changes. I mean, if we know that we have MTHFR mutations, then we can manage that accordingly by eating more liver or egg yolks daily or supplementing with specific B vitamins. So, I mean, personally for me at least, and I'm sure for you as well, like you've gained much more precision knowledge on how to change your epigenetic factors that you're doing every day by understanding your genetics. So that's where self
Correct.
decode comes to help. Yeah.
Correct.
There's another kind of idea in, I mean, alternative health circles that is not even alternative health, but just diet camps that kind of get very evangelical about the diet and say that okay, if you just go on this diet, then it's going to cure all your diseases. I mean, vegans come to mind, but of late, more recently, even the keto carnivore community is kind of like that. I mean, you just go carnivore and it'll reverse all your autoimmune diseases. So, what are your perspectives on different diets? I mean, from where you're sitting currently?
It's very heavily dependent on your genes and what your predispositions are. So for some people, they do better in various ways with a keto diet, and some people do better in various ways than a vegetarian diet. I think the extremes of these are less likely to do well on, whether it's full carnivore or full vegan, because people haven't really lived that way for any extended period of time. So when you're at the extremes, there's less people that are going to do well. But what happens when you kind of go towards the middle of the bell curve? There's some people that are going to be on one side, on the other side, meaning they do better with more plants. Some people do better with more meat. And on the fringes, you're going to have some people that do much better. I think it's quite rare for somebody to just do amazing with all meat or amazing with all uh, vegetables or plant-based foods. So it really, and there's always a trade-off as well. I don't think anybody likes to discuss that, but they don't. In general, when you have these diet camps, they tend to see things as like, if it's good in every way. There's no possible negatives. So if there's a negative, it means that it's not really a negative. And the classic example for that is LDL cholesterol. So because people on a carnivore diet have LDL cholesterol, they then think that LDL cholesterol is not important, because how could it be important since the carnivore diet is perfect? So they kind of base their decisions about other things on how, they kind of take everything in science and kind of just warp it around what they're actually doing. And so anything, well, if they're not eating plants or fruits or vegetables, then they say, well, vitamin C is not that important in the
Mm.
RDA. And so there were people saying that for a while, until you kind of realize, like, something's not right with my body. Maybe I am deficient in vitamin C, and that takes some time to occur. Or, they might say, oh, fiber is not important. Again, these things, like, you could say nothing is important because you have your base ideology, whereas the vegans will say the opposite. You don't need any meat, right? And so, and they'll, they'll
B12
try to
tests are
find
also very
every, yeah, they'll try to find every way to say, well, if there's a study that shows if you don't eat meat, you're more likely to be depressed or whatever, or you need creatine, or you need all these other things, omega-3, and nah, you don't really need that. It's just, they kind of make all these excuses, and so it goes both ways. And
it does.
the answer is you do generally, people need a mix of both, and where you fall on that continuum, how much fat you need, how much carbohydrates, how much plants. That's heavily dependent on your genetic predispositions.
Yeah, I've seen similar arguments being made for T3 as well. I mean, on a ketogenic diet, that the argument is that the tissue receptor kind of activity increases, so you need less T3. So I mean, they come up with explanations like that to fit their bias towards the diet. And personally, I have been a vegan. I've been like keto carnivore as well. So the only thing that's properly helped me coming like to where I'm at now, because I struggled with many symptoms earlier. I had like chronic cystic acne, seborrheic dermatitis, tonsillitis, chronic fatigue. So I've kind of that's what started my own health journey, and I experimented with veganism. It kind of made me feel better for a month or two, and then the honeymoon was over. After that, I experimented with keto for a very long time. So I was like doing continuous ketosis for around 9 months, and that fixed like my brain fog, and the memory and stuff became very sharp. But then my other issues like my seborrheic dermatitis and my acne got kind of worse on that, which is something I figured later on, that when you go keto, that your riboflavin and biotin requirements go up. So because of that, like I was having issues with that later on.
And thiamine, a whole
Yeah.
bunch of things go up. Yeah, that's part of the problem. You go on a diet, your body can, you start to experience the benefits. You generally you can delay the negatives because all the deficiencies, you don't really notice that on a day-to-day basis. It's only after a while, and you could say like, oh, I'm feeling great, this is the solution to all my problems. But then, whether it's 3 months, 9 months later, you start to be like, uh-oh, wait, things are going backwards, I wonder what's happening, right? And you kind of, you're all of a sudden getting negatives, more negatives and less positives. So I think the answer, but again, you really have to go back to your genetics and see what you need, what you're likely to be deficient in, and that's where Selfdecode helps finding out specifically how you can improve your biology.
Yeah, so I mean, I had all those experiences. I finished keto. I went carnivore. The benefits were there, but then these other issues kind of, because I have issues in my gallbladder as well. So not like really with my gallbladder, but this is something I got to know after doing my genetics, that I had many SNPs in the pathway enzymes that were making bile in my body, and my bile acid. I checked it in my serum as well, and it was like chronically low. So because of this, I didn't do well on high fat diets, but still the benefits were so great in terms of mental clarity, and like you forget about like eating, and there's a lot of benefits as well, but then they come with their own kind of downsides. So that didn't kind of finish my own resolution of my health problem. So I went deeper. Then I started getting more into like personalized medicine instead of just moving from diet camp to diet camp and trying different things. So I started running a lot of
Right.
tests. Started that's when I ran my genetics, and that's when the biggest breakthroughs came, which is why like people really underappreciate, if you actually get a genetics and you get it from a good platform like Selfdecode, which can sort through millions of maybe irrelevant snips and put together like actionable stuff based on studies, based on polygenic risk scores. It can give you a really good idea as to how you can approach the things that you've been born with. So Joe, what sets self decode aside from other genetic companies? Because I mean, I first got my genetics done many years back from this company in India, and I mean, with the way in which I see it after learning so much about genetics now compared to what analysis I got back then, I think most companies aren't doing a really good job, because they kind of giving you like one intervention for every single SNP, and it becomes very overwhelming after a point, the amount of changes, and there's not even much literature behind a lot of those things that they tell you to change. So what sets self decode aside from these other genetic companies?
Well, there's a lot of things that set Selfdecode aside. One of the main things is all these other companies that are doing the health analysis. They're using outdated technology that is not better than a coin flip. What that means is that it's actually not predictive at all to look at one SNP or two SNPs. And so when they're looking at these small number of variants, it's not valid. It's worthless. It's a waste of money. And it becomes basically like scientific astrology, which some people might find entertaining, but if you actually want to know if you have a predisposition for something, then that's not the way to do it. So one is the underlying science, which is you have to look at polygenic risk scoring, which is like millions of variants per topic using sophisticated AI. And then also having recommendations, not per SNP, but per the issue that
Mm.
might get prioritized based on the SNPs, right? So the way that it's done now is some companies, give a recommendation for every SNP, but that SNP is not going to be predictive of somebody's health issues, number one. And number two is you shouldn't take anything just because of one SNP. So, I mean, as a general rule, there might be, very few exceptions, but essentially, you shouldn't do something because of one SNP. If it were the case that there was one SNP that was so powerful, it might be a case like ApoE or something to that effect, but one variant was very powerful. But in the vast majority of the cases, even MTHFR, it's not clear that you should take. The only thing that's clear is you take make sure you're getting enough riboflavin in your diet for MTHFR. But the reason they do these studies for SNPs is to show if somebody has an issue already, to show a potential mechanism, right? They're mechanistic studies really that they're showing like, okay, what are all the potential mechanisms for Alzheimer's? So you take people with Alzheimer's and you see what SNPs these people have. What's statistically significant. Now, if I have a variant that somebody with Alzheimer's has, doesn't change my risk of getting Alzheimer's, really, generally speaking, because there could be thousands or millions of variants, right? And so to the science community, it's important to see what are all the mechanisms, even if it's 1 out of 1,000. But to an individual, it's not going to predict what your risk is of getting Alzheimer's or anything like that. You have to, so you have to look at many variants for prediction. And then in order to get a recommendation, you have to look at what are the recommendations for that thing that you want to improve, for that area that you want to improve. And then you could prioritize those recommendations based on variants because that pathway might have a little more significance as it relates to you. But you should never. So in terms of other companies, they're not giving recommendations, that are prioritized or personalized, and they're not using sophisticated prediction methods. And in addition, they also don't have a bunch of other tools that we have, like analyzing lab results and things like that.
That's something I found really interesting. So I just like to share my screen and just show my own self-decode portal, because that will help people understand this much better in a practical way. So this is like Selfdecode's portal, and out here you get your kind of highest to lowest risk areas that way. So just some things that blew my mind, Joe. I mean, if you just go to the biohacker reports, like just the first thing, I mean, like, we'll just let this load. Yeah, so the highest thing is like mold sensitivity, and then I actually got like my labs run for mold practically, and then you can see like I have really high stachybotrys antibodies. So it genetics kind of gives you a very good fix as to what issues you can really go after and you should prioritize. Because knowing this, I mean, seeing that I have genetic issues in terms of like mold, which can really go and cause a lot of downstream issues, and then seeing that come up in my labs as well gives like a additional thing. So this is something that I really
Correct.
like.
Yeah, correct. Before you go away from that, go down a bit. Cadmium and higher levels of cadmium, arsenic. I mean, these things could cause chronic fatigue. So the next step that you want to do is do a blood test for these, right?
Oh, you won't believe
Uh,
it. My arsenic levels have been high since 2018. Like really, really high. I mean,
so
like
there you
outside.
go. I mean, no, I do believe it because, if you have a high predisposition, it doesn't mean that you're going to be high. For example, you
Yeah.
could have a predisposition, but if you're never exposed to any arsenic, then
Mhm.
obviously how are you going to have high levels?
Yeah.
But there's some people exposed to arsenic and they still have low levels because their body knows how to get rid of it. You're obviously not one of those people based on your genetics. And since you may have been exposed to maybe average levels, you found that your levels are high. This is another thing you want to target. So you could they might have low energy, they might have some brain fog, they might have some fatigue, they might have some autoimmune issues. And then they're like, oh, I wonder, where do I start? And so they often go to get some like alternative medical testing, which is bullshit most of the time.
Yeah.
Um,
I was just
whereas
watching the
this,
podcast, Tommy Wood on that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Whereas this, it gives you a whole bunch of predispositions. Now, these are not diagnostic, but they then tell you where to search for. So you could see that you also have higher predisposition to mercury. Doesn't mean you have higher mercury, no, but you've got that predisposition here. And so you've
Yeah.
got arsenic, cadmium, mercury. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of your problems had to do with heavy metals. And there's very good ways to check for heavy metals, number one. And number two is to chelate them and get rid of them from the body. Lower levels of oxytocin, that's an interesting one. Higher levels of glutamate. So oxytocin, there's ways to improve your oxytocin, and that could also cause various issues. Oxalate sensitivity can, that means that you might want to be careful by consuming foods with high oxalates like kale, high
Spinach.
dose vitamin C,
Yeah.
spinach, yeah. Um, and so, like, does it mean that you have, like, if you're drinking a lot of water and you're not eating a high oxalate diet or you're not mega dosing vitamin C, you probably won't have that issue for a while, but,
Hmm.
it's something that you should think about, right?
No, this
Go
is,
up.
this is where my keto carnivore experiment helped me a lot because I really got conscious about oxalates, and then I started avoiding oxalates, and then I figured out that I have like a sensitivity around it in my genetics, so I anyway avoid them like the plague,
Right.
more or less.
How
And
much?
even
Yeah, I mean, how much
glutamate.
glutamate? What?
I was saying that even my glutamate levels, this is really, really fascinating. So, I got my like genetics done, and I saw that I have like a predisposition for higher levels of glutamate. Then I was researching more on glutamate, and I found that if it's high and you kind of meet with a accident, or your blood-brain barrier opens up, then all the glutamate can just go flood your brain and cause like a very high level of
Correct.
brain damage. And even, I mean, just high levels being there in your blood, like they can slowly seep into the blood, past the blood-brain barrier, and cause neuronal death and stuff. So I was very concerned
Correct.
about that.
Correct.
Like high glutamate levels have been linked to a lot of stuff in studies like mental health disorders. And then I actually checked my like serum, amino acids. So I checked my glutamate levels, and they were through the roof over there. So
Oh,
like it
interesting. Okay.
together in a way.
That's very interesting. So there you go. I mean, you checked your glutamate. You've been aware of oxalate sensitivity for some time. You've got some heavy metals. You noticed the arsenic was high in your blood. This is an interesting one. Increased need for COQ10, and that could improve a bunch of different biomarkers. You would check if you have different biomarkers for oxidative stress, maybe some your GGT levels in the blood. But in general, I think that's a great supplement anyway. And then all these have full reports that you can click on and see more information for,
No,
right?
dude, this is
So,
really revealing because I mean, I'll show you more stuff that way. Like, so, my genes for inflammation are messed up because I've checked like my glutathione genetics are messed up, my superoxide dismutase genetics are messed up. And then I saw this, and then I went and like, I've been doing my lab, like my blood work since 2018. So my HSCRP levels used to be 14, like, 7 years
wow,
back.
that's super high. You know what
Yeah,
mine is?
I know, like probably point one
Mine
or point two or something.
is point 0.2,
Yeah.
zero
So,
point 0.2.
So yeah, I mean, I know
Yeah,
about how low they're supposed to be, and I was really shocked when I saw them being that high. Even my CRP, ESR, like all the inflammatory markers. I mean, there's good research showing uric acid also like goes up in inflammation. There's some other markers as well. So all of these have been on the
for
higher side.
sure.
Yeah, and
Go
then I
down.
mean,
I want to see if you don't mind. I want to just see more
sure,
tendon
sure.
injury. So I mean, this is if you get some teeth grinding, more likely higher levels of sodium. Everything here you could do stuff about. So
Yeah.
you should compare all this stuff to your blood markers and see not like higher increased need for selenium. Interesting.
I
Higher
think that's
levels of
because,
total
yeah, I've seen
protein.
studies where if arsenic levels go up, like your need for selenium goes up. I think maybe it's coming from there. I'll have to go and check that. But yeah.
No, it's an independent thing.
Okay.
Increased need for selenium is going to be independent. Uh,
Got
More likely to get a yeast infection, more likely for fatigue, go down, more likely knee injury. You might
The
want to think
yeast
twice
infection
about
thing makes a
running.
lot of sense because the seborrheic dermatitis is linked to malassezia. So, I mean,
Yeah, for
that
sure. That's a
is
yeast infection, no question
yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Increased need for zinc. I had an increased need for zinc. I have one in my genetics, and my zinc has always been low unless I supplement, no matter how much meat I eat. More likely kidney stones.
Maybe that's right.
This is related to oxalates, that the
Yeah,
kidney stones one. But so if you're drinking a lot of water, you're not eating a lot of oxalates, then you shouldn't have a problem. Overactive thyroid, but that not likely you'll experience that until
no,
maybe later on. Or
yeah,
certain things have, if it's got a low incidence, like overactive thyroid for men is like maybe a few percent of men, especially your age. So it's not going to,
mm,
even if you have a high risk, it's not likely that you're going to actually experience that symptom.
yeah,
Where certain other things are increased need for vitamin D. Interesting. Have you
yeah.
checked your sleep
I can
quality?
tell you my own personal experience with all of these. So for potassium, for instance, I mean, you can track the potassium need quite easily by looking at serum CO2, like bicarbonate. So that mainly goes down when the blood gets more on the acidic side. So it's kind of indicates a need for potassium, calcium, magnesium. But then out of all of those, like potassium is the most important from what I've studied. So typically, like if
Correct.
I'm generally with the way I'm eating, like if I'm not being mindful about my potassium intake, then my bicarbonate does go down quite a bit that way. Plus, I mean, everything
What's
out
your
here.
serum potassium? What about your serum potassium?
That used to be on the lower side, but then once I got mindful and started supplementing with that,
Okay, so there you go.
yeah,
The serum potassium used to be on the low side, which makes sense. By the way,
yeah.
I don't have increased need here, and my serum potassium was never on the low side. So, um, you see, lower
But even
levels of blood calcium.
lactose intolerance is like a big thing because I've struggled with that. Like, I mean, it's until you do elimination diet, do you figure out like you actually are reacting very badly to
Right.
certain food. So the lactose
Caffeine
intolerance is,
sensitivity.
yeah.
Copper is a very important nutrient. You should make sure you're getting enough of that.
Yeah, I do. I eat liver every day, so I think that takes care of that.
Oh, okay, so that takes care of the copper. Go
Yeah.
down. Go down. I saw you also have the dairy sensitivity, which is casein. It's different than lactose, but that means you're lactose and casein sensitive, which means you should stay far away from dairy in
So
general.
I know like this because it reacts very quickly on my body. The minute I'll have lactose, I'll get a seborrheic dermatitis flare up. Like my entire
It's not the
scalp will just.
lactose, it's the casein.
Oh, all right. Okay,
The
that's interesting.
the
But
lactose is a sugar. You don't react to the you just get gastrointestinal problems from the lactose.
got it.
What you get
Got
the
it.
instant inflammation from is the casein. That's what triggers the immune system.
Got it. But then it never
So
really happens with yogurt, which is why I thought it's lactose. Because when I have yogurt, even though it has the protein, it still like doesn't make me react the way in which I do when
it
I have
could
milk.
also because it also has other things like it could have probiotics. It could have certain
Got
IgA. It
it.
could have. I don't react when I have colostrum, which
Yeah.
is because it has a bunch of immunoglobulins that kind of counteract the sensitivity. So, but in general, yeah, that's what it means. That if it was only, how do you do well? How do you do with cheese?
Really bad. Like everything,
Okay,
cheese,
so
milk,
cheeses in
everything just
general, cheese has low lactose in general, but it has
yeah.
still has the casein. So
Mhm.
if you don't do well with cheese, then that means that you're casein intolerant as well, which again shows in your genetic predispositions. It's not always
Mhm.
100% going to be, but in your case, it's obviously expressing because
Yeah.
you have that predisposition, and then certain environmental triggers as well, of course. Lower levels of bilirubin. How's your sleep quality? Do you track that?
I do. I used to wear an aura ring. I mean, I think like 2 years back, and that time I
What
used to
did
do a
you?
lot of stuff to improve
What did
the
your
heart rate.
what did your deep sleep come back as?
It was really long back. I stopped tracking it, so I really
Oh,
don't
okay,
remember. But it used to be on the bad side, which is the reason why I'd ordered aura ring to begin with, because my sleep
right.
wasn't really good. I had a hard time in terms of like and training my circadian rhythm, so I wasn't really able to just fall asleep at night. I've always been a night owl, so I would wake up. I mean, I'd sleep like 10, 11 hours and still wake up feeling like I haven't slept. So this has always been like a big issue,
Right.
which I fixed by doing everything that I'm doing. So
That makes sense. I could show you my results so you could see like the difference.
sure, one second.
Um, but I actually get good sleep quality in my genetics. I believe, well, at least a deep sleep one. And I get pretty, people are shocked. Like, I get very good deep sleep. I mean, I think some of that is obviously what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
but then some of that is just genetic predisposition.
Sweet. Let's have a
Okay,
look.
so let's go based on risk. So if we, can you see my screen? Yeah.
I can. I can. It's on the screen now. People can see that.
Yeah, so just to show you, like, I've done a whole bunch of testing, so I know exactly what the deal is. If we go through this whole list, vitamin K, I have increased need for it. If I don't take vitamin K, the reason I know is if I don't take vitamin K, my gums start to bleed.
Oh.
So I always knew I had increased need, and obviously, like, I just knew that from like 15 years of biohacking, but Selfdecode just tells you that right away. Increased need for zinc. I mean, you could look at something like zinc here. You could see my tab here, right? The first time I checked zinc was in 2018. And look, I had a low level here. And
Yeah.
I knew I was deficient already in 2013. And I was probably like even a third of this level because I was so deficient then. But then at this point, I was just eating meat all day. Like I was on a carnivore diet and my zinc was still this level, which is like, how is that even possible?
Well, yeah, that doesn't make
So
sense. I mean, typically for zinc, what I've heard is if you have it with grains and stuff, then it inhibits the absorption. But if you're on carnivore, I mean, there's nothing really
I was
inhibiting.
on a carnivore diet in
Yeah.
2018, more or less, like not 100%, but most, like almost completely. And
So what helped this? Like
uh,
zinc supplementation, right? Like,
the only thing that helped was zinc supplementation. And then I got too much and then I had to go back. So now I know that I need 10 milligrams of zinc and that's the amount. But you could see increased need.
yeah.
I did used to snore. Not anymore, but I think that's, environmental triggers definitely. My
Hmm.
hematocrit levels are generally on the higher side. I've obviously always had gut inflammation. That's how I got into this, but I got rid of the gut inflammation. So that's where the epigenetics comes in. You could get rid of all these things, right? But I have that predisposition. So, and that's probably why one of the reasons why my zinc was lower than even my genetic predisposition might have, like, okay, you could have increased need, but why am I
Hmm.
only eating meat and it's still low, right? So it probably had to do with some gut inflammation. Overactive bladder. I've always had overactive bladder. Uh, Not anymore. Again, so a lot of these things were like historical, but I've been able to overcome my genetic predispositions. But if you look at hematocrit, even from 2012, yeah, you
Hmm.
could see it's always high, right? Which is
Yeah.
not a bad thing. It shows that I have a predisposition for higher levels. It's not such a bad thing, I should say. More likely sleep movement. This is true. Egg allergy. I am allergic to eggs, so I don't eat eggs.
Do you notice
Even
with your hematocrit, like your MCV, MCH also tends to be higher, or is it just the hematocrit?
it's those. They all tend to be higher.
Oh, like yeah,
Yeah,
because they tend to move together in blood chemistry. Yep.
correct. Like so hematocrit. Let's see. I could check MCHC. Well, actually, I take that back. It's just the hematocrit. You see, my
Got
MCHC
it.
is normal.
Got it.
What was the other one?
MCV, MCH, MCHC. There's like
MCV. Well, it's mean corpuscular hemoglobin. So the mean corpuscular hemoglobin tends to be on the higher side. Not as high as the hematocrit though.
mhm.
The MCV tends to be normal.
Got it.
So really, it's meant like, and if you look at my hematocrit, hematocrit, I mean, it's just on a different level. You see, like it's always quite high.
Hey, sorry. I got
Um,
that mixed up. I meant like the hemoglobin, RBCs, and hematocrit. They tend to move together. Yeah, that was my bad.
they
Because the
do, but you could still have like they don't move like 100% together.
Mhm.
So if you look at, let's see, my hemoglobin, hemo. So I do have higher levels of hemoglobin, right?
Mhm.
On here it shows. Well, it doesn't say higher levels. I have a higher predisposition. This is
Yeah.
my genetic.
Mhm.
This is my labs, and you could see it is on the higher side here.
Yeah, a couple of times you've been on the high side. Yep.
Well, it's always on the higher side here, but
Hmm.
like 16, it's almost always around 16, which is pretty high. Now these are higher, but in general, it's like 16. It's like the borderline 16. The most recent was 16.1, which is high, but it's not like
Yeah.
pathogenic or anything.
Mhm.
It's not bad. That's why we don't put a red face here.
Got it.
But you could see how just very clearly this is, objectively you could see that here's my labs. How many this is 14 lab tests that I took. Every single one of them is on the higher range, more or less. And you could see my genetic predispositions. More likely to have acne. I used to have acne in the past.
Okay.
Hearing
How do you
loss. I
what do you
what I do. I mean, there was a bunch of things. It was in general like lowering inflammation. Really got rid of fixing my gut, lowering inflammation. That really got rid of a bunch of issues, improving my immune system.
Mhm.
And by the way, each of these has recommendations, so you could click on them and see what the
Yeah, even the
recommendations are.
recommendations are very detailed. I mean, I went and saw the recommendations for inflammation, and they were like 16, 17 kind of
Yeah,
yeah.
there's 12 recommendations here. You could
Mhm.
see, a lot of them have to do with like limit dairy intake. There's a bunch of things, but zinc could, I'm not sure exactly at what point it got rid of it, but like maybe I started taking zinc and that's what got rid of it.
Zinc and vitamin A are super important for acne. I mean, even in my own
Yeah,
personal
maybe it
journey.
was I was started taking more omega 3s. It's hard to say exactly sometimes what got rid of what, but basically some of the things in there, I'm sure. So you could see estradiol,
Yeah.
creatine kinase. I'm not just picking out the stuff. I'm going through my results. Like you could look at this creatine. It shows I have higher levels. This is a
Yeah.
genetic predisposition. And estradiol.
I could do the same for my
So
labs as well. It's just that I didn't have it loaded in Selfdecode, but I have my labs like separately, and it's been fascinating to see like most of the stuff that's showing a risk in the genetics kind of lands up being that way in the labs. So it's very
yeah,
fascinating.
and by the way, sometimes it's not the case. But
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of meaning you could have a genetic predisposition for one thing. Like it says I have a genetic predisposition for high blood pressure.
Hmm.
Now, I've checked my blood pressure and it was high at certain points, but now because of the things I'm doing, I'm probably following every recommendation here. It's low. So I used to have hemorrhoids. You're not going to have visceral fat unless you eat a shitty diet. So I never had that because I've
Yeah.
always eaten healthy.
I mean,
Had
like
low
you said,
mood.
I mean, you can have the predisposition, but then what you're doing, if even if I mean, for arsenic, for example, if you never come across arsenic, you're not even going to have a chance to get toxic and have a hard time for your body to clear it out. Similarly, for everything,
Correct.
well, yeah. So it's
Looking at all these things here, everything was true. The only thing that were not true, I would say vitiligo, but again,
yeah.
it's a rare condition. It's only 1%. So more
Hmm.
likely just means that you know, you have a 2% lifetime risk of getting it instead of 1% or 3%. You still only have a 1 in 33 chance. So whereas other things that are more common, like hemorrhoids, you're much more likely going to get to have that or C. diff infection, high blood
I mean,
pressure.
plus a lot of the stuff
Um,
maybe you might not come to know because these like chronic conditions develop if you don't take care of your health early. And since you've been biohacking for so
correct.
long, you could have got
That's
this and
right.
never done
I
anything.
could have correct. I could have gotten vitiligo if I was just by the age of 50 or something, or whatever it is, right? If I never did anything. It's
Yeah.
just impossible to, like, again, it's also rare, even if I never got it, but even if I'm 5 times more likely than normal,
Yeah.
only 1% of the population has it. So even if 5% of the even if there's a 5% risk chance I would get it, it still doesn't, it's still only 1 in 20 chance that I'm going to get it. So the point
Yeah.
is that it's a predisposition. It's not a diagnostic, but it tells you exactly what to look out for. Like, what are your predispositions? So I
Mhm.
never got varicose veins, but my mom has them, right? So, uh, they're more likely in women, and they're more likely as you get older. So you're not going to get it at the age of like 20. Um, so a lot of these things are also age dependent. There's a lot of kind of things that you need to keep. Same with palpitations. You're probably not going to get them when you're 20, but when my mom had them, so you could see that like a lot of these things that I didn't have, uh, either I may have gotten them if I would have been not healthy, or I could get them later, or I have family members who had them, so there is some kind of genetic predisposition. And so all these kinds of things are quite interesting. And this is just there's a whole bunch of different sections you could
Yeah.
search
I
in,
really like the biohacker
right?
report section. Yeah.
The biohacker reports are for more advanced
I know.
people, because like some of the reports there, people don't really know.
Yeah.
Another good example is, like, let's say if you check testosterone, that's very like, before we check testosterone, it says I have typical levels, right, based on my genetic predisposition.
Hmm.
Now, what my actual levels are can change based on um, what I'm doing, right? So this is when I checked it. This is when I was 10 years ago, so even 10 and a half years ago. So this is a typical testosterone for somebody who's on a decent diet, on a good diet, let's say, right? I would say that this is correct, given I was healthy 20, yeah, 24-year-old male. Seems
Hmm.
like a typical testosterone level. As I'm getting older, it's going down. And then you see me check my testosterone in 2018. I'm like, holy shit, it's going down. I
Yeah.
start doing things to make it better, and now it's considered very
Did you
high
start
for someone
supplementing
my age.
DHEA by any chance?
I started supplementing DHEA, but yes, I did. In this test, at these two tests, I was taking DHEA. It's not. I was taking a lot of things though. It's not clear it was the DHEA, but if you look at my genetic predisposition for DHEA, it shows I have low levels.
Hmm.
And then if you look at my test results, so
On the lower
um,
side.
this is when I was not taking DHEA. I'm
Got it.
not sure what I was doing here, to be honest,
Hmm.
but this was no DHEA, and you could see it's on the lower end.
Yeah.
This is with DHEA. This is when I stopped. So I kind of basically, it was too high, so I said, okay, I'm gonna get off of it, and
Got
then
it.
just went back to a lower amount. So I got back on. So now I know what dosage to take. I wasn't taking any here, taking 25 milligrams here. Now I wasn't taking anything here, but there was probably still in my system from a couple of weeks ago, and
Yeah.
now I'm taking like 12 and a half milligrams. So that should put me in the middle of the range. But you could see that I do have a genetic predisposition for lower DHEA. That's clear because no DHEA here. You could see that my levels are pretty damn low.
Hmm. And this is after, I mean, you figure this stuff out after years of experimentation, right? Like you at least have to start to get maybe 5 years later, you'll have a bunch of labs with you and you can see your own patterns when you look back and see how much you need or what you need to do differently.
Yeah, but if I had Selfdecode to begin with, it would have saved
Yeah,
me so much time, right?
true.
Because like all this stuff, a lot of stuff I know already, but the
Hmm.
amount of time I had to spend on this stuff is ridiculous. How many blood tests did I have to take to see, or all these kinds of predispositions?
Yeah.
was years of testing and also just like knowing like, oh yeah, I'm losing my hearing a bit, right? My hearing isn't so good, or I've got acne, or and then you don't know what to do. These are going to give you all the recommendations that you need. And then these as well, like a lot of stuff I didn't know here, right? Oxalate sensitivity, BPA sensitivity, I found out that I had even before the genetics, but it was confirmed. It was confirmed with the genetics. And MTHFR, didn't know until I had the genetics. Regenerate this. BDNF, that I understood from the genetics, but I confirmed it after. This was I knew before, but I didn't know where it was in the genetics, and then we found the place, so that was interesting. You could see I've got the non-celiac gluten sensitivity here. So
No, and what I really like about this is that it's not like too much red. I mean, it's just maybe 10 or 20 reports that are red. So I mean, like you have a good idea as to what you should be focusing on or looking at. Because I see many other places they
yeah,
like every snip is a problem, and it's like so much to do. You really don't know where to even start. But this gives
right.
a really good idea about how to
Well,
approach
each of
this.
these reports is also looking at, I mean, even more so here, like if you look at, um, like let's say we take a look at blood pressure, you
Mm-hmm.
know, somebody might say, oh, you have this one SNP or whatever, and this means whatever. But you could see how many variants we're looking at. We're looking at 1.2 million variants here.
Okay.
Yeah. And we give you some of the top variants to look at, but basically, like, we're looking at so many variants here that, it's just like, it's not relevant if you look at one or two.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, and you could see then all the other things, I mean, it keeps going. I've got lower gut microbiome diversity. I could see that. Higher alcohol sensitivity, increased need. So I actually listened to all these recommendations, and I mean, the difference is massive, right? It's incredible.
Yeah.
Increased need for iodine. So all these things are really, whereas, by the way, I don't have the same issues with mold sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
as you do.
Yeah. No, dude. I mean, like it's really been path
I
breaking for me in my own
say
health journey as well. Yeah.
Yeah, same with the heavy metals. I don't get any of the heavy metals, by the way. Arsenic, my oxytocin is good. Typical levels of glutamate. What else? Lead. I don't get all these cadmium. My heavy metals are. I've never had an issue with heavy metals. I've like taken chelators, no
Mm-hmm.
issues whatsoever.
Got it. So you've always
So
like checked your
same with
serum level
mold.
that way, so you never had an issue. Cool, man.
Never had
Love.
an issue with my serum, and I've done experiments where I took high levels of things that chelate all different kinds and didn't notice anything during, after,
Yeah,
just didn't affect my health in any way. So I never feel like I've had any issues with heavy metals.
yeah. I'm just gonna be
Um,
trying like EDTA and silica soon, so I'll figure what happens to me.
and same with mold. I never felt, I mean, nobody does well with mold. Nobody's going to tell you to breathe in mold, but I've never had like a sensitivity where, if I smell a little mold, I'd get like knocked out or anything like that. Um,
Yeah.
like it wouldn't interfere with my health for a prolonged period. So knowing your genetic predispositions, and that's also like we also have other reports you should check out if you haven't, like the there's 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 some of these summary reports. We're making a bunch more of them that are really cool. You could see bigger picture stuff
I have
for
seen it as well. Yeah.
yeah, for your diet, like what kind of diet you should follow, what
Mm-hmm.
fitness plan. So that's also pretty cool. Like better response to dietary fat, dietary protein. So I do better with dietary fat, which makes sense. I could see that. Typical response to carbs, typical response to protein. I could see that. Um, yeah, and this is the best the best program on the market by far. I mean, it's not even close, as you probably already know.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, which is why you're the only genetics founder that I'm interviewing on my channel. So yeah, I mean, like I'm really,
Yeah.
whatever you've put together has really helped me in my own personal health journey as well of late. And I'd really recommend, if someone really wants to dig into the health and kind of go deeper into their own biochemistry and figure out their issues, you can probably see why. I mean, there's so much debate around diets online, and it's so clear to see why it wouldn't really work. I mean, like one diet wouldn't really work for everyone because we're all so different, I think, which is what like people take a little bit for granted, that humans mostly are the same, but there's so much variation from person to person in terms of how they respond to like a million different things, that we actually have that level of advancement in science and knowledge today, that we can figure these things out and in a very actionable way kind of manage the issues that we all have been born with. So for those of you all who are interested, at my company Thrive, we do offer like a genetics thing, so you can kind of sign up with us, and then we sign up with Selfdecode as well. So we have a practitioner account with you guys, so then like we have the report that comes through you all, we help in helping our patients understand how it's really impacting them. So yeah, any final thoughts, Joe, for closing?
No, I think yeah, I think people are gonna really enjoy looking at it either with your help or I think they're it's a game changer. So I think this is the new way of how people are gonna optimize their health.
Great, Joe. Thank you so much for your time, man. Cheers. Thanks.
Awesome, my pleasure. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.